After just 1 week of the fantasy football season, some of you are feeling like this, but a lot of you are feeling like this. If you're new to fantasy football, welcome to the roller coaster ride. Yep, some of your best players will do absolutely nothing, and some guys that you've never heard of will do exactly what your best players should have done. So after week 1, we got a lot of players that might be worth picking up on the waiver wire. I'm going to go through all of them, but first, let's talk injury and figure out which players you might need to replace in your lineup next week. Didn't take long for the first major injury on the Friday game between the Chiefs and the Chargers. You probably saw Xavier Worthy was absolutely laid out. No, not by a defender, but by Travis Kelce. Unintentional, sure, but here we go. Kelce at least showing he's still good for something. So Xavier Worthy has a dislocated shoulder. Still waiting on official word as far as a time frame, but he's wearing a brace. And, at first it was feared that this might be a fracture, something that would possibly ruin his whole season. It doesn't seem that way. But here's the thing. He'll probably be out a couple of weeks. But look, some analysts feel like the redislocation risk here is very high, which means even if he goes out there, a guy like Worthy, let's face it, not a big guy anyways, could go out and get injured again. So this is going to be very tricky here. And don't forget, in just a few weeks, Rashee Rice will be back, and he's the #1 receiver there. So I'm not going to say that Xavier Worthy all of a sudden is a guy that you need to drop. Don't do that. But keep in mind, you're probably going to be without him in the short term. But also suffering a shoulder injury on Sunday was the Falcons' #1 receiver, a guy I was super high on, Drake London. So on that touchdown, that wasn't a touchdown, got reversed afterwards. Looked like he might have scored. Well, not only did he not score, suffered that injury. He didn't then come back for that Falcons final drive. Drake London, his status is going to be up in the air. We'll see exactly what's going on here. We didn't get any official word from Raheem Morris after the game, so we're going to play the waiting game here. If he does happen to miss time, which we're hoping he doesn't, then that does open the door for some other receiving threats in the offense. A big one that actually might wind up just being a big scare for nothing, but we'll see. Brock Bowers, you might have seen kind of limping off there late in the game as well. This was a knee injury, and of course, anytime you hear that, that's pretty frightening. But the good news is he basically blew it off after the game. He said, "It's no big deal. I'll be back there next week," making it sound like it's absolutely nothing. Let's see what the practice reports say this week before we just take his word for it, But again, this doesn't seem to be anything serious. So hopefully, we can just breathe a sigh of relief. On the other hand, another tight end who did suffer what could be a serious injury, George Kittle. Yeah, he left the game after scoring a touchdown. And you saw him in street clothes late in that game. Hamstring injury. You know how this goes. Probably will miss a couple of weeks, and then it's going to be just kind of tricky after that. Shouldn't miss a lot of time, but I would be shocked if he's out there next week or even maybe the week after that. And so, that of course led to the long awaited Jake Tonjes breakout game. Like, seriously, can we just have a rule in the NFL where backup tight ends just aren't allowed to score touchdowns? And the 49ers, they can't just have one injury. How about Juwan Jennings as well? No, not the calf. That got all better once he, signed that deal. But his shoulder, he also exited this game. This is going to be tricky. Remember, this guy did miss a significant amount of time in the preseason, kind of haggling over the contract situation. So we're going to have to wait for more word here. But right now, Juwan Jennings is a guy you want to keep an eye on. And then one more tight end with an injury, Evan Engram. He's been battling injuries. Feels like every season for the past couple of years. He left late in the Denver game with a calf issue. Not sure exactly what his status is going to be going forward, but definitely something you want to check. I was excited to see what his role would be in this Broncos offense, but, this could be cut short. All right, let's get to those waiver wire ads. Now, first, if you already know how this goes, I'm going to break down players from every position. These are the guys actually worth chasing. There's a lot of players that you probably saw get in the end zone, did something here or another. If I don't mention them, it's because I'm not saying you should go out and get them on the waiver wire. There are certain players you don't want to waste your fab on. Now, also, disclaimer here. I'm going to name some players, and at some point you might say, these guys aren't available in my league. I mean, come on, who's getting these guys off the waiver wire? You'd be surprised. But also, look, we all play in different size formats, right? Some of you are in 8-team leagues, 10-team leagues. Some of you play 14-team leagues. We don't know exactly what your league looks like. I'm going to give you recommendations for shallow leagues and for deep leagues, as many positions as possible. These are the guys that are actually worth going after. this week. So let's start with those shallower leagues. These are guys that, look, I get it. Maybe they're not available in your league, but maybe they are. If they are, these should be your top priorities. We have to start, of course, with Bill. If you were on social media at all about an hour into that Washington New York Giant game, you probably saw a collective victory lap being taken by anybody who drafted Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt or talked about him in any way before the season. So JCM, aka Bill, did wind up getting in the end zone in the second quarter. Also had a nice long run, 42 yards in one play. All told, 10 carries, 82 yards on the day. First half, it wasn't like that. He was actually behind Austin Eckler for carries. We expected that. What we didn't expect before this game, right before this game, was that Chris Rodriguez Jr. would be a healthy scratch. And this is not at all what we were led to believe. And so shame on us, or shame on me specifically, for thinking that an NFL team might be honest with its depth chart or anything whatsoever. But look, if Bill's the guy here, which it seems like he is now mainly the guy, Austin Eckler will obviously still be involved. Jerry McNichols was active instead of Chris Rodriguez just because he's a guy who can work out on third downs and, be a pass catching back, the veteran here. It's still going to be somewhat of a committee, but I think we have to admit it looks like JCM is going to be the guy who's the most fantasy relevant. Let's face it, Austin Eckler's best days are behind him, and Krosky-Merritt has that explosiveness. He didn't catch a pass. That's the one thing that's going to keep his value down somewhat in a PPR league. That's going to be Austin Eckler's role. So I'm just going to say this. If he's out there in a 10-team league or deeper, yes, pick him up. An 8-teamer, a really shallow league, maybe you just got no bench space. I'm just going to say this. Don't go crazy. Don't drop a Kenneth Walker or a Monty for him, because those guys are still really good despite not having a good week one. But for the most part, if Bill is there, go get him. Likewise, Javonte Williams, you saw it on Thursday, those 2 touchdowns. Now, here's the one thing I got to say is I was not big on Javonte Williams this preseason at all. I even put him on the do not draft video. I'm taking ownership of that, and I'm not just going to say that he's all of a sudden going to be the guy all year long, because I have reasons to have doubted Javonte Williams. But here's what I did see on that Thursday game. So first of all, the question was, would any Dallas running back really have value? Is this team going to be able to run the ball? What we saw was that against a pretty good Philadelphia Eagles defense, sure, without Jalen Carter, but still, they were pretty effective. We saw a long run even by Miles Sanders. Javonte wound up with 54 yards on 15 carries, but what really made his day fantasy-wise was the 2 touchdowns. But on the other hand, even though we don't like to chase touchdowns, he's the goal line back. He's the lead back, and Sanders' fumble didn't help him in any way. And so even if we think Jaden Blue might be a thing, it's going to be a while before he becomes anything. Javonte is the guy. This offense overall looks good. They were able to run. Don't feel like Javonte's going to have a great game every week, and I don't know exactly how much value he's getting you without touchdowns, but he does have that touchdown upside. So definitely worth picking up. Again, in your really shallow leagues, don't go crazy, dropping good players for him. But most formats, you want him on your roster. And then with the Kittle injury, the Ingram injury, and the hopefully not an injury for Bowers, but you never know, we got to talk tight end a lot more than usual this week already. Kyle Pitts. Like Kyle Pitts, I know is kind of punchline kind of in the fantasy community, but there are still believers, and maybe you're right to believe in him. What we saw so far was pretty good in week one. This was a nice matchup against Tampa Bay, but the other thing is the Drake London injury. What if London is going to miss time? And Darnell Mooney already missed this game. We don't know if he's going to be good for week 2. Kyle Pitts might have a golden opportunity here to become the number 1 receiver in this offense. And Pitts was already really good in this game. 7 receptions for 59 yards, had the second most targets on the team behind only Drake London. So this is going to be kind of touchy as far as the situation here. We'll see exactly what goes on with London and Mooney in terms of injuries, but even so, this is not a deep receiver room, and Pitts, maybe he's actually fully healthy for the first time in who knows how long. So while there are other interesting tight end options on the waiver wire, I think if Pitts is still out there in your league, he's got to be first. And before we get to the more widely available waiver wire targets, this is another one I'm kind of shocked that Chris Godwin is still available in about a third of all fantasy leagues. I know he didn't play in week 1. I know he's probably not playing for a while, but I know he is now expected to come back in week 5. That's the official word. Ian Rappaport even tweeted this out. He's already ready to get back to practice. They're just going to make sure that everything's good to go, give him some time to ramp up. Week 5 is the target date. Now, maybe it's week 6, maybe week 7. That seems to be worst case scenario. And of course, there could be setbacks. I understand all that. But when you have a guy who is so prolific of a pass catcher and such a good offense, and look what he did last year before injury, Chris Godwin is worth stashing. I see people out there stashing Brandon Ayuk. Why wouldn't you stash Chris Godwin as well? And yes, apparently Emeka Egbuka is pretty good, right? There are those who would say that maybe he's already the best receiver in the NFL. I wouldn't say that. And look, just because he outshined Mike Evans in this game, it doesn't mean he's all of a sudden the number one guy and everyone else is irrelevant. Chris Godwin is absolutely worth stashing. If you got the space and he's out there, I would do it. Now let's talk about those players that most of you are going to be fighting for on the waiver wire this week. Time to bid up, use your claims, your fab, whatever you got, and try to get these players. And keep in mind, these aren't necessarily in a strict order of priority here. I'm going to talk about the ones I think are probably going to be top targets on most fantasy waiver wires. And let's start with the guy who you saw in one of those early games, largely because of the Xavier Worthy injury, but also Hollywood Brown. He's a guy who was on our radar basically all offseason. I drafted a ton of Hollywood, not just in my best ball leagues, but also in my redraft leagues. I've already got him in a lot of my leagues. I don't have to worry about fighting for him, but apparently not a lot of people did buy into Hollywood. Only 25% rostered on Yahoo leagues. Now everybody's scrambling to pick him up. Look, this isn't just because of Worthy's injury, and it's not just because he's in Kansas City, right? Both of those are obviously major factors. Hollywood's been a talented player. He just hasn't been playing, right? All last year missed because of injury. And yeah, he is sort of injury prone, but guess what? He's healthy. His teammates not. Well, one of them suspended as well. And this isn't, I don't think, just a small window of opportunity for him with just kind of biding time until Rice comes back. Sure, Rice will probably be the top target once he's back, but Hollywood's still going to get targets. These guys will all be a factor here. The Chiefs, as you know, like to pass the ball quite a bit. And we saw in week 1, look, Hollywood Brown, 10 receptions, 1 yard shy of a 100-yard game. This is not going to be a fluke, I don't think. He's not going to get 10 catches every game, but still, he's going to get a very healthy target share, especially over the next couple of weeks. So I don't see him necessarily as a league winner because you got to think long-term playoffs when all these guys are hopefully healthy and back. But I think Hollywood will be a major factor over the next few weeks, and then he will still have relevance from then on out. In that same game, we saw another veteran shine, and that's on the other side, Keenan Allen, who's back with the Chargers. And some of you are saying, but wait, what about Quentin Johnston? He scored twice. All right, that's nice. Look, Quentin Johnston will do that from time to time. In fact, you may not remember that last year in week 2, he did exactly that. He caught 2 touchdowns. Everybody went crazy for Quentin Johnston. This was it. This was the breakout. It wasn't the breakout. I mean, he had some games here and there that were nice. He also had some QJ-like moments with drops and just bad routes. And look, he's going to be inconsistent. That's what he is. He's better in best ball, but I would rather chase not just touchdowns, but the targets. This is what you do. Keenan Allen led the team with 10 targets, more than even Ladd McConkey. Keenan Allen had a pretty nice game overall, 7 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Sure, he's not a very exciting name, right? He's a 30-plus-year-old wide receiver. He didn't have a great season last year, but you got to remember, he was on a team with a totally inept coaching staff in Chicago last year with a rookie quarterback who wasn't quite ready in Caleb Williams and fighting for targets with a first-round pick and another really good receiver in DJ Moore. He's in a much better situation, obviously, this year. Justin Herbert there. He already knows the team. He knows the quarterback. This is a great situation for him. Just because he's not a new exciting face doesn't mean he isn't fantasy relevant. And this might be a great time to get him, especially if you need somebody because he gets to face the Raiders next week. And while the Raiders did win their first game of the season, they give up almost 300 yards passing to Drake May and the Patriots. And you know what? A big part of that passing attack, in fact, the biggest part, believe it or not, was Kayshon Boutte. I was taking a look at the stats, the box scores, and watching them throughout the game. I was shocked at halftime. He was leading the way with 74 yards on 4 catches. It didn't stop. By the end of the game, he had 103 yards on 6 receptions, the same number of catches as Stephon Diggs, and the most yards on the team. It's funny because I mentioned this exact stat earlier in one of the draft videos related to a totally different receiver. But Keyshawn Booty was one of the leaders among all wide receivers in unrealized air yards last year. That means he's getting his shots, he's getting big opportunities to make plays down the field. Just the connection wasn't always happening. And sometimes it's on the quarterback, sometimes it's the receiver, both, whatever. A lot of different variables here, but there's obviously some opportunity for him. 421 unrealized air yards last year, they were getting realized in week one here. Drake May was looking for him often, and they connected. We saw almost nothing from rookie Kyle Williams. Somehow, Demario Douglas got 2 receptions for -2 yards. Yeah, he was looking for Diggs, he was looking for his tight end, Hunter Henry, and he was looking for Kayshon Boutte. And before you say, well, wait a minute, what about that Raiders defense? You just was railing on that defense. Isn't that part of the reason they put up big numbers? You're right. Well, guess what next week? Get the Dolphins. And because of that matchup and all the stats I just threw at you, you need a tight end. Maybe you're missing Kittle. Go Hunter Henry if he's there. Hunter Henry tied with Kayshon Boutte for the most targets in New England's offense with 8. He wound up with 4 catches for 66 yards. Didn't get in the end zone, and so, it wasn't a thrilling fantasy day, but this was really encouraging in terms of how he was used, how much he was targeted. We know Hunter Henry, right? He's pretty good for reaching the end zone on occasion. The matchup next week, obviously another good one. Drake May could take another step forward in his development. And you know what? Again, this receiver room is not that deep. So Hunter Henry's going to have a chance really to be a high-end streamer or, hey, maybe even a low-end tight end one on a weekly basis. Now, if Henry's not available and you still need a tight end to replace an injured one, all right, let's go with the guy that I said to stash last week. If you got Brenton Strange, you can just plug him in right now. Now, Brenton Strange also didn't have a monster stat line or anything like that. It was off to a good start, actually. In fact, right before that lightning delay in the second quarter, he had 3 catches for 49 yards, and that was, again, midway through the second quarter. Somehow, he still led the Jaguars with 59 receiving yards. Just wasn't a big passing day overall for them. I still believe Strange is going to be used pretty frequently as a target here in this offense. I definitely believe the Jacksonville offense is going to have to pass it, probably more than they did in week one. They weren't really, put on the spot too much by Carolina's offense. I think that will come in time, but still, as far as Jacksonville goes, I still think the target volume is going to be there for Strange. So Henry's, well, okay. Pitts is your first priority. Henry's next. And if you're still looking for a tight end, I'm going Strange. All right, I'm back to receiver here. Let's talk Pittsburgh. Somehow Aaron Rodgers pulled out 4 touchdowns for his season opener as a Steeler. You know what? Good for him. That's great. I'm not buying into that. I'm not telling you to pick up Aaron Rodgers. But I will say that Calvin Austin definitely looks fantasy relevant here. Not only is he the number 2 receiver in Pittsburgh, which we figured going into this season, he was right there, number 2 statistically behind DK Metcalf in every category. Metcalf had 7 targets, Austin had 6. They both had 4 receptions in this game. Metcalf 83 yards, Austin 70. But Austin had a touchdown and DK didn't. And tell you what, if you were watching part of that game, especially late, Austin could have had a much bigger game. He drew a pass interference call on one of those late drives. And then there was another pass down the field where he really should have. So, I mean, the opportunity is clearly there. He's already getting big chunks of air yards. I don't expect this offense to put up that many points. This was easily the most shocking game in terms of score. Thought this would be one of the lowest scoring games of the year. I was told both these teams had good defenses. Apparently not. And so, Austin, don't expect this consistently, especially getting the end zone part. But we know he's got speed. He's a deep threat. And obviously, the targets are going to be there because he is still the number 2 guy as far as this passing game goes. Now, shockingly low scoring game, at least compared to expectations, was Cincinnati Cleveland. I'm not going to talk about the Cincinnati side. We already know what we got there. Now, as far as Cleveland, well, a lot of people were wondering how is this backfield going to look? It's basically Dylan Sampson's at this point. Yeah, they just really don't believe in Jerome Ford as anything but a depth piece. Dylan Sampson not only led the team in carries, he had twice as many rush attempts as Jerome Ford, and he was one of the leading receivers for the Browns in this game. He wound up with the second most targets in Cleveland. And what's frustrating here is the fact that he was used more frequently on early downs. Jerome Ford seemed to be the third down, just passing back only, but Dylan Sampson still got that work in the receiving game because they were throwing to him on first and second downs. Kind of aggravating that neither guy, who was actually owned by fantasy managers, got that touchdown. It was Raheem Sanders who came in as the vulture. I gotta wonder if that short yardage work is gonna go to Samson at some point soon. In the end, you're gonna say, well, yeah, this doesn't matter because Judkins is there, right? Kushan Judkins finally signed. He'll be a factor pretty soon. It's still gonna take time, right? This guy has not been with the team. They're not just gonna throw him in the mix and make him the lead back. So at least for a couple more weeks, Dylan Sampson will be getting most of the carries here. But even when Judkins does factor in here, Sampson then will shift to that third down role. He'll still be the leading receiver. And this is why we like Dylan Sampson, coming out of the draft process. He's a great receiver, and that's why they kept going to him over and over again out of the backfield. He's going to get you at least a pretty high floor in PPR. You could think of him, I guess, kind of like a Jalen Warren type of player. He's somebody that is going to give you a floor, which I know we like to chase ceiling, not floor. But for the time being, if he's going to get the majority of the carries as well, and don't forget, even when Judkins does get activated, there still could be a suspension coming, right? So Sampson does have possibly a ceiling. And look, I did not think I was going to talk about multiple Cleveland Browns, but also what, four tight ends in week one? But here we are. This is just how it goes. Also, not even a starting tight end for his team. Harold Fannin. Look, we heard great things about Harold Fannin out of camp. We know that he put up big numbers in college, but this was supposed to be David Njoku's game. This was his chance to shine. He crushed Cincinnati last year. They're horrible against the tight end, and Harold Fannin was the guy that they were going to, not because Njoku was hurt. He's fine, right? You're like, what happened to him? Nothing. He was there. He was out there. He was getting targeted too. For some reason, Joe Flacco was just targeting Harold Fannin more. Fannin led the Cleveland offense with 9 targets and wound up with 7 catches for 63 yards in his NFL debut. The yards didn't come on one big chunk play. He was targeted over and over again, getting those crossing routes, and he was making the most of it. Now, we do need to reel it back a little bit because, as I just said, Cincinnati was the worst against tight ends last year. They did have to pass the ball quite a bit. This wasn't, in the end, a high scoring game, but I will say the opportunities are going to be there because, let's face it, Cleveland's going to probably have to continue to pass the ball more than they like. I wouldn't go so far as to say you should start Harold Fannin in a fantasy league just yet. This is more of a stash, but I don't want to save him for the stash video. Thinking if it's a deep enough league, those other tight ends aren't available. Look, Fannin could wind up being a lot more important in fantasy than we thought he might be. All right, it's only been 1 week. There's a lot to unpack already. Don't worry, we got you covered. More start sit advice alongside the waivers, the panic, everything you need. We got you covered. Just check out this playlist.